Seraphine Vale woke up before sunrise, the way she always did. Not because she had to, not because anyone told her to. She woke up early because the quiet hours of the morning were the only time the world felt like it belonged to her. She lived in a small room above the laundry building in the Omega Quarter, a part of the Silver Throne Kingdom that most people with power never visited. The walls of her room were thin, the window was cracked at one corner, and the blanket on her bed had been repaired so many times that it was more patches than original cloth. But the room was clean. Everything Seraphine owned was clean and carefully kept, because that was the kind of person she was. She took care of things. She was 22 years old. In the Silver Throne Kingdom, wolves were ranked by birth. Alphas at the top, betas in the middle, and omegas at the very bottom. Seraphine was the lowest-ranked omega the kingdom had recorded in a generation. She had no special skills, according to the official records. No mate, no family, since her mother had passed away 7 years ago. She was, by the kingdom's own measure, nobody. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the cracked window and watched the city slowly turn gold with the early light. She did this every morning. She was not sad while she did it. She was simply present, in the way that people who have learned to live quietly inside themselves often are. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday. It slid under her door while she was lacing her boots. She recognized the royal seal before she even picked it up. The silver wolf crest of King Kalen Ashvale, pressed in dark wax. The letter was short. It said she was to appear at Ashvale Court that afternoon for a kingdom ceremony. No explanation was given. No explanation was considered necessary. She was an omega. She would come because she was told to. Seraphine folded the letter neatly and tucked it into her coat pocket. She finished lacing her boots. Then she went to work. She arrived at the palace gates at the time stated. The guards looked at her the way people look at furniture. Present, acknowledged, irrelevant. She was escorted through the side corridors, past the tapestries and the tall stone arches, into the grand assembly hall. The hall was already full. Every seat held a noble, a lord, or a visiting dignitary. Seraphine stood at the entrance and understood immediately what this was. She had heard of rank ceremonies before, formal gatherings where the kingdom displayed its social order to visiting wolf lords from other territories. They were political events, dressed up as tradition. King Kalen Ashvale sat on the silver throne at the far end of the hall. He was exactly as described in every story anyone had ever told about him. Tall, dark-haired, and carrying the kind of absolute stillness that powerful people develop when they have never had to explain themselves to anyone. He was 26 years old and had ruled since he was 19, after a succession dispute that had taken 2 years and considerable pain to resolve. He had come out of it harder than he went in. Most people who survive difficult things do. At his right side stood Lady Mira Velstrom. She was beautiful in the careful, deliberate way that suggested she had worked at it. She saw Seraphine walk in and smiled. Seraphine noted the smile and what it meant, and kept her face entirely still. The ceremony began. Various wolves of rank were presented and praised. Then, near the end, Seraphine's name was called. She walked to the center of the hall. Every eye in the room followed her. King Kalen looked at her, the way someone looks at an example in a textbook, useful for the point it proves, not interesting in itself. He spoke clearly and without any particular feeling. He said that an omega without rank, without achievement, without a place in the pack's structure, was a demonstration of the hierarchy's lowest tier. He said this not with cruelty in his voice, but with something almost worse, complete indifference. As if she were simply a fact he was reading aloud. The hall responded. Some people laughed softly, some nodded, some looked at their hands. Seraphine stood completely still through all of it. She did not look at the floor. She did not press her lips together or let her eyes go wet. She looked at the king. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, not long enough to be considered a challenge, but long enough to be noticed by anyone paying real attention. And then she looked forward at a point past his shoulder and waited for it to be over. Commander Draven Ashwood, standing in formation to the king's left, watched her. He was 30 years old, had served the royal guard for 12 years, and in those 12 years had felt the pull of his guard instincts very clearly. Always toward the throne, always toward the king's bloodline. That pull was how the bond worked. It had always been simple and reliable. He was not sure what he felt right now, watching this woman stand in the center of the hall and refuse to break. But it was not simple, and it was not nothing. Afterward, Seraphine was escorted out through the servants' corridor. She was almost at the door when she heard footsteps behind her. Light, deliberate footsteps that she recognized without turning around. "You did well," Lady Mira said. "Staying so calm. Most Omegas cry." Seraphine turned around slowly. "I don't cry in front of people who haven't earned it," she said. Mira's smile tightened, just slightly at the edges. She said several more things after that. Specific things, aimed things, the kind of words that are designed to find the softest part of a person and press there. She mentioned Seraphine's mother. She mentioned the room above the laundry. She said, with perfect sweetness, that some wolves are simply born without the ability to matter, and that there was no shame in accepting it. Seraphine listened to all of it. When Mira finished, Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I feel genuinely sorry for you." Mira blinked. She had not expected that. "Sorry for me?" "Yes," Seraphine said. "You clearly work very hard to make other people feel small. That must be exhausting." She paused. "Good night, Lady Mira." She walked home in the rain. She allowed herself, once she was inside with the door closed, 7 full minutes to feel everything she had not shown them. Then she made tea, went to bed, and slept soundly. 3 weeks later, a different letter arrived. This one was from Elder Theron, the oldest wolf in the Silver Throne Kingdom, 93 years old, keeper of the royal archives, and widely considered by the nobles to be a charming relic of the past. Seraphine had met him once, years ago, at her mother's burial. He had looked at her then with an expression she had not known how to read. She thought she understood it better now. His letter said, "Please come to the archive tower at your earliest convenience, on a matter of some historical urgency." She almost didn't go. She went. Elder Theron was exactly where she expected, surrounded by towers of paper and the smell of very old things. He looked at her when she entered, the way people look at something they have been waiting for. He did not offer pleasantries. He reached into the drawer of his desk and removed a sealed envelope that had yellowed slightly with age. "Your mother came to me the week before she passed," he said. "She gave me this and asked me to keep it until your power began to surface." He held the envelope out. "I believe it has begun." Seraphine's hands were completely steady when she took it. She broke the seal. She read. Her mother's handwriting was exactly as she remembered it, small and careful, and absolutely certain of itself. The letter said, "You are not Omega ranked because you are weak. You are Omega ranked because what you carry has no category in their system. The first wolf's blood runs in our line. Old before the kingdoms, old before the ranks. It has been quiet in you, because it was not yet time. When it wakes, do not be afraid of it. It is not something that happened to you. It is who you are. I am sorry I will not be there when you finally understand that. Be patient with yourself. I love you." Seraphine sat in Elder Theron's archive for a long time after she finished reading. The old wolf did not rush her or fill the silence with words. He simply sat with her, the way very old people sometimes can, having learned that silence is not empty. Finally she looked up. "Did you know?" she asked. "I suspected," he said. "Your mother was certain." The days that followed were strange, in small, unexplainable ways. Commander Draven Ashwood found himself stepping aside in the corridor to let Seraphine pass, not because he decided to, but because his body moved before his mind had a thought about it. He stood in the corridor afterward and examined the feeling carefully. It was not like anything his training had described. It was not fear. It was not the kind of loyalty he felt toward the king. It was something older and quieter than both. Lieutenant Lysera, the only female member of the Royal Guard, sought Seraphine out under the pretext of delivering a routine message about a change in the market curfew. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about small things, the weather, a baker in the Omega Quarter who made extraordinary bread, the way the palace felt different in winter. When Lysara walked back to the barracks that evening, she felt, for reasons she could not explain, that something had settled in her chest that had been unsettled for years. The other 5 guards experienced their own versions of this. One brought Seraphine a bag of fruit without being asked, and could not clearly explain afterward why he had done it. One walked her home from the market, maintaining exactly the right distance so she would not feel followed, close enough so she would feel safe. None of them talked to each other about it, but when they were together in the same room, a new kind of quiet had entered their group, the quiet of people who all know something they haven't said yet. Lady Mira noticed. She was very good at noticing things, which was part of why she was dangerous. She watched the guards and she watched Seraphine, and she thought carefully about what she saw. Then she acted. A formal accusation was filed with the Palace Council. 3 signed statements claimed that Seraphine Vale had stolen provisions from the palace food stores: salt, dried grain, a flask of oil. The penalty for theft, for an Omega, was public correction and permanent exile from the kingdom. The evidence looked solid. The witnesses were credible. The council called for a formal hearing before the king. Seraphine received the notice and read it twice. Then she folded it the same way she had folded the royal summons weeks earlier, tucked it into her coat, and went to find Elder Theron. Not to ask for help, to ask for facts. She wanted to understand exactly what was being said about her before she walked into that hall. The hearing was held in the Grand Assembly Hall, the same hall, the same throne, the same cold stone and silver banners. This time, Seraphine noticed that several of the nobles in the gallery looked uncomfortable before the proceedings had even begun. That was interesting. She stood in the center of the hall. King Kaelin looked at her from the throne. She could not tell, from his expression, whether he had already decided what he believed. The council presented the accusations. The 3 witnesses spoke in turn. The evidence was laid out carefully. It all sounded very certain. When they finished, the council turned to Seraphine. She was given the opportunity to respond. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform distress or outrage. She simply stated the facts, one by one. On the day the theft was alleged to have occurred, she had been at the market, and she named the baker, the cloth merchant, and the woman who sold herbs near the East Gate, all of whom had spoken with her. She had not been near the palace stores. She did not know the witnesses who had signed the statements. She had no explanation for why they had signed them, but she noted, with great calm, that Lady Mira Velstrom had organized the original rank ceremony and had spoken to her privately in the corridor afterward. She left the implication exactly where it was and said nothing further. A silence followed, the kind of silence that has weight. Then Commander Draven Ashwood stepped out of formation. In 12 years of service, he had never done this. The sound of his single step forward was very loud in the quiet hall. King Kaelin's eyes moved to him immediately. Draven did not apologize for the interruption. He walked to the center of the hall and placed a folded set of papers on the council table. He said, in the level and measured tone of a man who has prepared carefully, "I have here the actual palace supply records for the dates in question, reviewed this morning with the head of provisions. Nothing was taken from the stores. I also have a signed account from a records clerk who was approached 3 days ago and offered payment to alter the ledger. He declined and came to me, and I have a receipt from Lady Mira Velstrom's personal household account for the payment made to each of the 3 witnesses." The hall did not erupt. It went even quieter, which was somehow more powerful. Then Lieutenant Lysara stepped forward. Then the next guard. Then the next. All 7 of them moved to stand beside their commander, not in the king's formation, but in their own. They had not discussed this. They had simply, each of them, arrived at the same place. King Kaelin sat very still on his throne. He was looking at his 7 guards. Then he looked at Seraphine. Then he looked at Lady Mira, who was standing at the side of the hall with an expression that had gone entirely blank. That night, after the hearing had concluded, and the hall had emptied, and the formal decisions had been recorded, King Kaelin sat alone in his study for a long time. He thought about what had happened. He was an honest man about his own actions, when forced to be, and he forced himself to be honest now. His guards, the wolves bonded to his bloodline by the oldest oath in the kingdom, had stepped out of formation for the first time in any of their careers. They had done it for an Omega he had publicly dismissed as the kingdom's lowest-ranked wolf, and they had done it because she was telling the truth, and he had been on the verge of ruling against her, without asking enough questions. He put his hands flat on the desk and looked at them for a while. Then he got up, put on a plain coat rather than his royal one, and walked out of the palace into the city. He found her in the small garden behind the laundry building. She was sitting on an overturned crate with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, looking at the night sky. Her silver-streaked hair was loose. She was not doing anything in particular. She heard him coming. She always heard things others did not, and she turned her head to look at him without standing up. He stopped a few feet away. He was not accustomed to not knowing exactly what to say. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You do." She moved slightly on the crate, making room. "Sit down then, and explain to me what kind of man speaks about a person in front of a crowd, without knowing anything about her first." He sat down in the garden dirt, in his plain coat, next to an Omega on an overturned crate. He stayed for a long time. He told her about the succession war, about the years of watching weakness be exploited, about how he had built his understanding of the world around the idea that strength was the only honest currency. He was not asking for sympathy. He was explaining, clearly and without flattery, how he had become someone who could do what he had done to her. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "That explains it. It doesn't excuse it." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in the garden for another hour. She told him about her mother's letter. She told him what Elder Theron had said. She was not performing any of this. She was simply telling the truth, the way she always did, to a person who was finally listening. And something happened as she spoke, the way things sometimes happen in quiet places, when a person stops holding themselves carefully. Her eyes shifted, very slowly, to pure silver. The garden around her seemed to breathe. The leaves on the small tree at the corner moved, though there was no wind. Kalen felt it the way you feel a change in weather, in his whole body at once, before his mind had caught up. It was not frightening. It was the most honest thing he had ever been in the presence of. He moved before he had decided to, one knee in the garden dirt. Not a king's gesture. A wolf's. At dawn, all 7 members of the Royal Guard assembled in the throne room without being summoned. Commander Draven spoke for them, formally, in the language of old oaths. "We who are sworn to the bloodline of the Silver Throne have found, in the world, a presence older than the throne. We ask the right to expand our oath." It had never happened before in the history of the Guard. There was no written protocol for it. King Kalen stood at the center of the throne room in the early light and looked at his 7 wolves. Then he looked at the doorway. Seraphine was standing there with her coat on and her hair still loose from the night before, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold again. She was looking at the 7 guards with the expression of someone who is genuinely moved and also genuinely exasperated. "You didn't have to make a whole ceremony out of it," she said. "Yes, we did," said Lieutenant Lysara firmly. Several of the guards nodded. Kalen looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was not a smile yet, but was close enough to see from here. "The oath stands," he said clearly. "Witness recorded." In the weeks that followed, the kingdom shifted in small ways that added up to something large. Lady Mira answered to the council for what she had done, and left the court quietly. The visiting wolf lords returned to their territories with a story none of them had expected to carry home. Several families from the Omega Quarter sent letters to Ashvale Court. Carefully worded, slightly uncertain letters, which were answered promptly and in full, which had never happened before. King Kalen did not change overnight. Real change in people does not work that way, and Seraphine would not have trusted it if it had. But he came to find her in the evenings, sometimes, in the Omega Quarter. He brought state papers he needed to read, and spread them out on her small table, because she would not come to the palace every time, and he had learned not to insist. She sat across from him, and read, or wrote, or simply kept him company in the easy silence of 2 people who had decided to be honest with each other, and found that honesty was, in fact, not that difficult once you started. She never performed her worth for anyone's approval. She never had. She simply continued to be exactly who she was, fully, without apology, and the world around her, slowly and with some effort, began to adjust itself accordingly. And in the palace barracks, on the night of the oath, Commander Draven wrote one line in the private journal he had kept since his first year of service. "I have served the throne for 12 years. Tonight I understood what it means to serve something worth serving." He put the journal away and went to sleep with the particular peace of a person who has finally found the right place to stand.